back. Psychedelics Today with the Flow State Frogman, Tommy Aceto. How are you today?
I'm so well. It's a blessing and honor to be here.
I'm really excited. And Court Wing, you're going to be helping me. I can't wait. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So, I guess, Tommy, let's dig in on you. I like to do kind of a big history and then dig into what you're into today. And you're up to a lot. And you also have a big history.
Yeah, I can condense it.
So you've got a big, robust athletic career. What were you? NCAA
soccer
basketball?
player.
Soccer. Sorry.
It's okay.
And what else were you up to back there?
Oh, well, I'm a product of two athletes. I always said I was a musician trapped in an athlete's body and outside of Detroit, Michigan. So you played sports or you played music or you became a doctor, and I wanted to do all three. My mom used to ask me when I was a kid, like, what do you want to be? And first it was pediatrician, and this is at 6. Pediatrician, firefighter, professional wrestler, astronaut. I did SEAL, not professional athlete, but we heal trauma of the mind, so that's pretty damn cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. The astronaut thing is so archetypal. I think I had astronaut and mad scientist.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of did both in a way. Inner space is pretty big too.
I'm pretty sure if you look in my yearbook, it says either scientist or astronaut, despite the fact that I was a drama major. So go figure.
Yeah, I did science my whole life. Like I said, I had a real passion for medicine as a child. I just always wanted to be a baby doctor. And then as you start doing the identity work after the medicine, and you realize like there's so much work in the identity. And I think what it was for me was I was raised in this Italian, Polish heritage family outside of Detroit. My whole family were teachers. And it was like, it was so heavily influenced by identity. It was a tough family. It was a big family, tough. And I was like one of the younger cousins and the middle child. I have an older brother. He's 2 years older, and a younger sister, 2 years younger. And it was always like, I felt like I was trying to build my identity to show my value. I had a father who favored the older brother because he was the oldest, and that's all he knew. So it was his natural thing to favor my older brother. He probably, because he was harder on him. So I think there was that. But for me, it was like the middle child, like waving the hands, connection with mom, tougher than the older brother, fought his fights, that was my story. And so the more I clung to this identity to being a pediatrician and then getting into college and I wasn't set up to go to medical school. I had some stuff from a divorce and some stuff as a kid that I didn't process. We didn't learn that word didn't exist. It was, here's your process. Take the rug, slip it under the rug, and smile and, win and get good grades. And that's what I did to survive. So, but as I said, as the work I did in identity, I realized that the identity is kind of built off of this thing called affirmation, which makes you feel safe and good. And that's dopamine. And I think we see the correlation between the ego or the identity work and the neurochemistry of things like dopamine, cortisol, and all these amazing emotions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about your NCAA career? Like It wasn't just soccer, right? Wrestling maybe too, was it?
Well, I was a 2-time state wrestling champ in Michigan, and my senior year I won it. It was an awesome experience. It really was what I call my Vision Quest moment. There was a movie and it really shaped my life. It was called Vision Quest with Matthew Modine, Madonna. It was the best soundtrack. It was on VH1 Soundtracks That Rock or something, Movies That Rock. And I watched that movie. I remember the first time I saw it, it was on one of those front projection, big pull down screens from the 80s, remember? And my dad was a high school wrestling coach out of Grosse Pointe North, which ironically, there's a movie called Grosse Pointe Blank with John Cusack. So my dad and my uncle both taught at that school, and he was the coach of the wrestling team. So back then they would make weight. This is like 1985 or 6, I think. They would make weight, and then they would have a big pasta dinner at somebody's really nice house in Grosse Pointe, and they wouldn't let me watch the movie because it was rated R. So this is my first like clandestine mission. I would like, me and my brother crawled underneath the coffee table and watched the movie. And I'll never forget it, because my senior year, as I prepared for the state tournament, I watched it all the time, and I couldn't go to sleep without visualizing each move I was making in that tournament. So when they raised my hand, I defeated this national champion Greco-Roman guy who I wasn't supposed to tie up with, because in Greco-Roman they throw people. And I launched this guy, kind of beat him at his own game. And in center ice, Joe Louis Arena, my hometown, it was 12,000 people there. And when they raised my hand, it was this moment of belief. Like, I was challenging my belief system. Like, I didn't think I could do it. And then sitting in that energy of like, this is happening. The damn song by Journey, Only the Young, started playing in my head. And I'm just like, whoa. It didn't sink in. And I couldn't sleep for 4 weeks after that match, because I was so used to going to sleep by visualizing my tournament, and I'd pass out, and there was nothing to visualize. So I remember, like, that was in high school, 1999. And I, like, to this day, I look back at that moment going, I think that was where I said like, I wouldn't have been a SEAL if I didn't do that, because being a SEAL, there was a huge factor of, we called it man camp, like people coming in, it was broken boys usually that came in to see if they were worthy enough to wear a trident and put themselves through, no pun intended, hell for a week. And, it kind of all just kind of flowed together. My story, I didn't really plan a lot of it, so I can't really take credit for it. It's just my story.
That's amazing and really interesting. Court?
The number of people I have met that have cited Vision Quest as an influence on some level in their athletic career or further endeavors is not insignificant. And a nice call out on Grosse Pointe Blank, because it has Benny the Jet Iroquois in it as well. So, that's a hot moment. Um, it's oddly evocative, though. Like, when I was getting ready for the international Taigi competition, like, it got to a point where it's just obsessive. I'm at work practicing literally behind the espresso bar, and then like finally I get told, like, knock it off, and it's just like having to really put aside so many other things just to get to this one performance moment that you don't know if it's going to happen or not. But it's like, it's a very common theme. And it's like, I wonder if, what degree of 5-HT2A type activity is going on there, because it's typically for most people, it's such a massive change. And particularly when it actually cements and like the thing you've been working on occurs in real life, and it also reminds me. So my very first CrossFit trainer, Dave Werner of CrossFit North in Seattle, he kind of describes a similar situation where when he applied to the SEALs, it was by accident. He went up and was applying to be an underwater demolition expert. And they said, well, are you applying to be, that or a SEAL? And he's like, well, what's a SEAL? And they're like, well, they do this stuff and you'd never pass anyways. And so he like takes the form, walks halfway across the base or something like that, kind of gets his fury under control, comes back and goes, I'd like to apply to be a SEAL, please. And, that's that. So
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And,
I lied. When I came in the Navy, it was 2003. I just graduated college, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life, because there's just no way I could have. I tried to be a strength trainer, and I was like, I'm selling to people how to lose weight, and like the method they use, it's like total ripoff. And it was a business, it was a sales job. And then they wanted me to give the person I signed up for like $12,000 to someone else to train. And I'm like, I looked around like I wouldn't let them train my dog. And so at that point I was like, man, I'm not done being an athlete. And my buddy that I was a soccer player with, he became a Huey pilot. His name is Jake Olson. He's still in, and he still manages to get behind the wheel and fly today. And he told me, he said, Tommy, if you go in the Navy to pay your college loans off and enlist, you're going to hate your life. He said, you need to be a SEAL. And I said, like a SEAL, like a Navy SEAL? And he's like, yeah. And I said, that's crazy. And he's like, you're crazy. And I was like, you're right. And that was it. Like, it was this, I watched the Discovery video, class 2, 3, 4. I bought it from the Discovery Channel, the CD, and there was no one back then that you could talk to about this. I never met a SEAL or anything. And I just, like, the first couple seconds I'm watching them run across the beach and I'm just like, oh, that looks horrible. I'm in. Like, that was it. That was kind of it.
So it's something about the challenge, the robustness of like, this looks like the hardest thing I could do, or was there a sense of that, or like what was the feeling?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. One, they're going to pay back my college loans, which is almost 30 grand. And then 2, it was 9/11, because I mentioned before I was a fighter. That's just my instinct. So like the nervous system, there's flight, fight, or freeze. I learned to fight, not in a aggressive way, like a bully way, but like, I remember my younger sister, were walking home one day. We lived right in front of an elementary school, and this bully kind of picked on her. He was 4th grade. I was 2nd grade. She was a kindergarten. And I didn't have it wasn't a hesitation, because I just remember my dad saying, if someone ever does anything to her, you punch him right in the face. And I just, 2nd grade, I just punched this kid in the face, and he kind of stunned because he didn't see it coming. And then I saw, oh, that worked. And I felt good because, I helped her out. And so that was my MO, was just fight. And when I saw 9/11 happen, I watched the second, plane hit. I was angry. I was so angry, so hurt. And it just fit a void, I think. And the biggest reason was I knew it was going to give me affirmation subconsciously. Like, maybe not as much as I know now, but I knew if I could complete that Hell Week, that I would have a little bit more affirmation, more drug.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cord, I don't think I told you this. I almost joined right after 9/11.
Sure.
I was ready to go. I think a lot of us were, right? It was a fascinating moment for me. And yeah, that's an interesting thing, Tommy. So I guess let's get into it. Like, so we have the whole psychedelic thing, but you had a whole robust career in life before the psychedelic thing probably arrived for you. Like, can you kind of talk about like how
history?
Yeah, a little bit of the history, and like, how it's hard on you, and like how it kind of like takes a toll eventually.
Oh, the operator syndrome, like being a SEAL.
Sure. Your experience as a SEAL, and then like how did it?
Sure.
How'd that go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, just for everyone listening, I never did a lot of, like growing up. I smoked marijuana a couple of times in college or high school. The first time I did mushrooms was in college in my fraternity. It was actually a kind of a ceremony type thing. We did it once a year. And it was set up the right way. But it was still recreational. And then the second time I did it was my last night of my senior year in college. I was trying to finish my, I was an exercise and health science major. And so I'm trying to finish my last lab reports and get them in. And my buddy's like, hey, we're going to the bar. I was living in a fraternity house. So I'm upstairs trying to get this thing done while everybody's getting riled to go out for the last night of college in this cornfield town of Alma, Michigan. And he's like, he's like, here, take it. And I'm like, I can't, I got to finish it. He's like, it doesn't hit for 45 minutes to an hour. So you'll be fine. So like 25 minutes in, the letters are starting to jump off the screen. And I'm like, whoa. Turns out my professor, who was just a great guy, worked for NASA. And he's like, Tommy, You barely graduated. I don't know what happened to you, but that last report you did was phenomenal. I want to invite you to this NCSM, whatever it was, like convention where I could brief some of this stuff. And I was like undergrad, like the only undergrad there in this master's level exercise and health science conference. And I'm laughing because, like, man, I was like, is there a connection there? Like that was 19 or 2003. But I didn't do any like psychedelics in the SEAL teams or anything. I did other drugs, a lot of them, and I was a medic, so we were like the drug dealers of the SEAL teams. And I don't feel so bad about it now because I recognize the programming that we were doing, and I'm not justifying it because there were guys that did it the right way without, with the addictions and stuff. But most of the guys that I came across with in the SEAL teams were dealing with what we call the operator syndrome, which is a neurological programming based off the fear of failure, because it all ties into that identity, right? And when they say it pays to be a winner, and you're like, I do not want to get my ass kicked or get that cold water or pour sand on me, and I know that the pain of failure, like they teach you that like nowhere else in the Buds program. That's the secret sauce. However, we have to hold them accountable for the neurological programming that endured, because when you get out of the service, especially operating at a high level like a SEAL team, it's a cliff. You do 3 years of training, millions of dollars, operate at this sustained high deployment rate, and all this stuff, and then they're like, and so it's amazing that we are able to. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but I feel like people like Dr. Martin Polanco, who I'm a dear friend with, and he will go down as the doctor who healed the SEALs of trauma in the mind. It's pretty cool to say that and to know that I'm like close to that story. We figured a way out based off of the ego that we developed. We were always trained to figure a way out unconventionally, thinking outside the box. And so when Dr. Martin was working in Tijuana healing heroin addicts with Ibogaine and 5-MeO, he said, this is a great combo. Let's try this on these SEALs, because there's a lot of SEALs that have, ironically, opioid addictions. and so when that convergence happened about, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, we kind of said, look, nobody's going to heal us. We're not waiting for someone to heal us. We have to do it ourselves. And from that, we got bills in Congress, the Breakthrough Therapies Act by Brett Waters and the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition. We're doing amazing things. And I always said there was two things that came out of war. It was weapons and medicine. And I think we're seeing something that we've never seen before. It's how to heal trauma of the mind.
Tommy, do you mind? Can you just paint for us briefly a picture of what that type of, that type of operational tempo is like? Because most people just do not get tier one operator athletes the levels of endurance, the levels of self deprivation, and it is far more selective to get into the SEALs or any of the other special operator divisions than the NCAA or things like that. Can you just paint us a little bit of a picture of what that is metabolically like to that system, as well as the culture of expectations and what has to, as you're kind of alluding to here, be actively suppressed at a certain point?
Yes. When you're living in the bubble of a SEAL or a special forces operator, you don't realize the difference in perception. And when I would meet these professional athletes, that I was like, this is a professional football player, this is a professional baseball player, and then you realize they're looking at you the way you look at them, and the reason is because of in the writing world, we call this what's at risk. What are the stakes? And the stakes in the SEAL teams is a bullet hitting you, or getting blown up, or falling out of an airplane that parachute doesn't, or whatever the risk is. And so in that environment, you are heavily occupied in the sympathetic state, which is survival mode, which is flight, fight, freeze, or procreate. And that's really the fundamental of what we call the operator syndrome.
And it's
It's
very
sustained.
catabolic as well.
Yeah. So what we're doing, and Dr. Andrew Huberman, he explains this so well, and so many other people, it's that you're basically keep stacking the dopamine up and up and up. And so when you're not there jumping out of an airplane, or on a raid, or doing something that's got high stakes, you don't feel good because you're not hitting the dopamine. And so this is where the addictions, and I'll tell you, the first one is masturbating and pornography, because it's an easy way to get dopamine. It's primal and it's biological, so it's a harder thing to break than just taking a pill or drink. But all of them combined, whether it's pills, drinks, the porn, or whatever the lifestyle is, a lot of guys were addicted to having affairs. I mean, because they're just and my brain's going, just say it. And I'm like, the animal behavior model is so apparent in this, you talked about the neurological programming of a soldier or a SEAL. If we look at it from an animal, if you train an animal to fight and to do these things, and he's got a reward system, that animal will go through anything. It'll do anything you want because it's been programmed based off its neurological system. And we as humans are no different.
We actually start to see epigenetic changes once people are brought down to a default level of survival, where like the real life stakes are like, I will die if I don't do this, and this is an ever present activity that's like part of the background of my culture. Yeah, I've seen the same thing in so-called third world countries that have like been through
Mm-hmm.
civil wars, where there is a very thin margin before you step into a level of reality that's hard for us to comprehend here.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
it's just raw survival is like footsteps away often.
Mm-hmm.
And if it weren't for the veneer of civilization, things could go quickly wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, the you talked about like kind of explaining the tempo of what's it feel like. The the we had a saying, you work hard and you play harder. I mean, in our culture, the Buds program, I always say, people ask you, what's the hardest, military program? And I'm like, look, we got turds and heroes on both sides of whatever service you serve in. I said, but the reality is there's a difference between being cold, hungry, and tired, and cold, hungry, tired, and wet. The wet part plays a huge factor on
Wet and
the
sandy.
nervous system and your ability to sustain that positive mental attitude and make it through training. So when you look at like the work part of it and the PTs of the SEALs and everything we do, it's like a Friday, it's a 10-mile run, 2 hours of calisthenics, and then swim 3 miles. And that's your Hoo-yah Friday PT. It's like, and it just snowballs every time. It's harder and harder. And that's the training that a SEAL or a special forces guy does. This is the opt cycle. It's a 2-year cycle, and it's broken up into 6-month sections. So you got 4 6-month sections. The first 6 months is personal development. You check into your SEAL team. You go to different schools, breacher, explosive school, or free fall school, or these schools. Then you get with your platoon and you do 6 months of ULT, which is you hit the 5 areas of our expertise, which is maritime operations, land warfare, urban warfare, house clearing, and air ops. So you hit the quals, and then the last 6 months before you deploy for 6 months is you specialize in where you're going. So you do more missions that fit your good. Like if I'm going to Afghanistan, I'll start to tailor my training there. If I'm going to Africa, I'll tailor my training there. And then you deploy for 6 months and you come back and you do it all again. And you don't, and so even if you're home, you're still gone. I was gone 10 months out of the year, my first 4 years at SEAL Team 2. So that's when I was stateside. So you're basically gone all the time. And, there's no coincidence that the divorce rates in the SEAL teams is the highest in any like collective organization. In fact, a good friend of mine, Mr. Mike Sweeney, he's a Hall of Famer out of the Kansas City Royals. He's just a really godlike man. And he would tell me that out of first year players out of the Major League Baseball had an 85% chance of divorce, addiction, or a suicide. And I was like, oh my God, there's other egotistic communities out there that are dealing with the same thing. And then I became friends with Jim Caviezel, and I saw like the actor world, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is not a military thing. This is a human condition based off of programming, based off of past traumas and epigenetic, energy of
Well,
trauma.
and so one time I got invited by Pavel Satsulin to help conduct a kettlebell certification down at the Dam Neck Annex in Virginia Beach, right? And the thing that struck me, other than like how incredibly difficult it was to impress anyone on that team, right? These are guys that are just, nothing is going to phase them. But so many operators, and we know this now, right, are operating with ongoing chronic pain, operating around acquired injuries due to that operational tempo and the training demands, and like, genuine. The one thing I think I saw was, anything approaching fear that was open was genuine distress about having to be taken out of rotation or duty or something like that. That was the, not wanting to have their, I think the phrase was sack smoked in public, and so, could you describe, I mean, so some of what you describe here around the self-medication, the self-soothing to an highly ramped up, sensitized, sympathetic nervous system, right? And we know a lot of people come to professions already with a background of things going on due to family life. Can you, when you look back at that now, and then how we've seen this like transformation within these teams, like through psychedelic medicine, can you provide a little picture of how people tried to cope with it then versus what we see starting to like actually develop as a practice and standard now? Because like I went to one CrossFit psychedelic science thing in Houston back in 2011, and they had a special side section for people that were actually training operators. So, I just happened to have been working with a few. And so I got invited, but the
Psychedelics were there, Court, like in conversation?
none. At the time, the consensus, this is the thing, is like how much has changed in a decade.
You
Right.
said
The
Okay.
time-
CrossFit?
Huh?
You said CrossFit? Like
CrossFit.
the company, like the brand, like CrossFit workout?
So I used to train in CrossFit. I trained
Okay.
at the very first CrossFit affiliate in the
So you
world
know
outside of
Paul
HQ. So
Castro?
no, with Dave Werner and Nick Nibbler at CrossFit
Oh,
North.
okay.
There was HQ in Santa Cruz, and then
Okay.
they told me go open one in New York, so we opened the very first one in NYC. But I was also doing kettlebells at the same
Yeah.
time,
Did you
under
know
our.
Joe DeGain or Sarah Wilkinson? They're judges. Sarah's husband committed suicide. I actually was at a retreat center with him, and his name is
Sorry.
Chad. No, yeah, she's doing incredible things, Sarah, with promoting this type of therapy that her that I don't know if Chad did the therapy or not, but she did, and she's this is her her thing, what she talks about. But and Joe DeGain was a wrestler from Indiana. Was a coach. So I didn't know if you knew
I
him.
judged for a while. I mean, I met a lot of judges, and then like, you know, the games obviously became huge and everything. But I remember from this exercise cert in this small side section for people training LEO and, you know, military and special operators and stuff like that, first responders. At the time, the belief was, just to paint a picture here, at the time, the belief was, as you kind of mentioned, once people got to a certain state of sympathetic windup and that acquired enough injuries and been through enough, you know, shocking events within the, you know, context of combat, it was just considered like, well, that's it, they're done.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Yeah.
we
So
can do is set them aside now, let them drink, don't bother
right.
them. And it's like,
Yeah.
I said, can't we do any type of practice that we have out there where we're doing some type of
Yeah.
parasympathetic retraining? And this guy looked at me and he said, no, you're fucked. You're
Yeah.
just fucked.
So let me answer that first question. I think it was how has what has changed in our community from past treatments to now, and I think I could sum it up by this saying of you got to feel to heal. And what we did in our community was shut down any emotional tie so that we could execute our mission set. And that's why all the blocking of feeling happens with the numbing yourself and self-medicating. That's why I was mentioning all those addictions, because you're trained to basically not feel. And that's essential for the job. Well, I don't know if it's essential, but I know I can see the correlation to not feeling and success on a battlefield. However, the retraining of this and the awareness is what's changing everything. And the thing that's changing that is the psychedelics, because I'll take this from Dr. Joe, which took it from probably someone else, probably Stan Goff, but an experience, it involves an emotional component, and that emotions are the human version of energy. And so when you have an experience, usually you remember getting slapped in the face more than a hug, right? Because it's about self-preservation. Ooh, that hurt. And you remember it. So if you have this experience, well, you have all these experiences that you've been numbing and blocking out. And so you have these grooves in your mind, which are the neural pathways. And if you just remotely touch or trip a landmine that activates one of those traumas, then you're like, ow, that hurts, go the other way. And so that groove gets put out there. And then you take a psychedelic and you lower the default mode network, you unlock the doors, you create a safe environment, and there's an energy of everybody else doing the same damn thing. And so in that environment, you have an experience, and that experience can change and reset and rewire the nervous system, the mind. But that doesn't happen unless you get into the parasympathetic state. And so now you have to coach and teach people and integrate people into this work. And again, the reason why it does work is because it's you that's doing the work. It's not, the medicine is just a tool that opens the door and allows you to see things and reprogram the freaking narrative that's held you down and caused this thing called victimhood or anger or not trusting people. And so we're unlocking that, but it's not the medicine that's healing people, it's themselves. It's their ability to rewire and look at things differently through an experience, which changes your reality.
So Joe, when we started today, Joe asked me to like save a question, which seems to, I think, fit in right now. So there's this idea, right, that we have this vast array of tools from our toolkit to use, like, you know, breathing exercise, journaling, you know, therapy, all sorts of somatic work and everything. And that there's some people out there in these larger communities that are still not down with psychedelics. They like kind of refer to it as a crutch, or they'll sometimes call it like, you know, like a shortcut or something like that. but it's very, very hard to convey to people that aren't in that state of, like, moral injury or severe depression or PTSD, truly, truly how difficult it is to self organize, self advocate, and be like effective beyond just like minimum level survival. And I don't think people recognize like how compromised the nervous system is at that point, and that in using these very, very powerful and transformative compounds, it helps to reset and restore the functioning of that nervous system by, in fact, taking the default mode network kind of offline a bit and getting that, entropic state going on, and that critical period reopening. Then all of these practices that were told, that have previously been like non-effective, like
Hmm.
typically you just hear them and you go because what else is there to do, suddenly they get like, surprising degrees of traction, and then all the self-work suddenly becomes like, remarkably enduring and impactful. I mean, I wish people would get that. It's like, it's very hard to employ these tools with a compromised nervous system.
Yeah.
It's
What?
incredibly hard.
Yeah. What I'm tracking. What was the question that you were tying that into?
So how would you? And I'm sorry, you're right.
It's okay. It's okay.
How it was inferred, right? How would you want to convey that to communities, to parts of maybe larger military community organization, the VA, obviously,
Hmm.
where we're finally seeing active
Yeah.
support. But how would you want, having gone through what you've gone through, how would you want to convey that to them so
Sure.
that they
Yeah.
understand that this is an effective means, and
Yeah.
it's not just effective, it's like vitally effective.
Sure. Yeah. And I kind of knew your intentions, but I just wanted to clarify it. This is how I would explain this the best for all you listening out there. If they're watching me, I'm going to look right at them. It starts with this thing called the Controlled Substance Act of 1970 by Dick Nixon and the CIA. If you look at that model and you look at not the war on drugs, but the business of opium and opioids, you will find your answer in how we unravel this monster called the medical system. And the reason why people don't understand that it takes an experience to change the neurochemistry is because that's not what was taught. We just talked about Stan Goff's book, Holotropic Breathwork, Transpersonal Psychology. If they leave out the third element of psychology, you got Freudian analysis, you got animal behavior, and then you got non-ordinary states of consciousness. Okay. If you are taught, and that is the reality in the system, and they have a book with codes that gives you a code for the insurance companies for every mental health condition, you see that the system is built not all ill intentionally, but a lot of it is because we created a system that's not, it's not, it's not fitting anymore. We outgrew it. And so you start to see everybody looking at the nervous system going, oh shit, this is an energy system. We have this NA node and SA node in our heart. And they taught us that when I was in fifth, sixth grade. I remember the biology classes. They're like, oh, yeah, you have a self generating electrical thing. I'm like, that's interesting. Nowhere else in the body but the heart. Like, that's all they said. But now we know that the nervous system is built on energy. And so that's the first problem, is that the system, the doctors, the medical schools, the insurance companies, they all fall under the umbrella of these pharmaceutical companies and the trading of opium, not just from the doctors and the people prescribing you, not just from the people that are dying and they push morphine on them because that's the most humane thing to do after you've injected them with so many chemicals. You're constantly making money off of opium, whether it's the morphine in the combat field, which we don't use anymore. We use ketamine because it doesn't lower the respiratory drive, and it dissociates any PTSD the minute you get that on. But we also see opium and opioids from, like I said, the hospice position where you're killing people with morphine. You see it in fentanyl. That's an opioid. You see it with Oxycontin. So, and now you see it from this side, but now you see how if our government, this is where I put my intelligent hat on because I did some intelligence work. You see the money coming in on the streets through Miami with the cocaine and all these opioid products and methamphetamines are in a box that has a label of medicinal value in Schedule 2. But Schedule 1 box has no medicinal value. And that's because they did MK Ultra experiments and they really did Nazi experiments on our mental ill, on our veterans. And we have proof of this. So I'm not making this up. This isn't a conspiracy. It's actual. And from that, I think some people high up in the 60s and 70s kind of knew the healing potential of this, but I don't really think that was the issue. I think they were too scared. The government was too scared that you couldn't control anybody because of the backfire off of Vietnam and the hippie movement and the LSD explosion. So that's how I would say we have to look at this is like, let's go back and see, what our system is. And when you look and you see that the students in medical school are being trained and by a certain way to prescribe medicine, then you go, oh, okay. So they just weren't aware. They just weren't simply aware. And the misbranding of, thanks to Nancy Reagan and the controlled campaign of the war on drugs.
Speaking my language.
I know, amazing. Joe, you know that. Come on, this ain't no, yeah.
Man, yeah, it's wild, right? Like we always want to assume ill intent from physicians, and it's not true, right? It's like their training, it's the political situation we're embedded in. Like I literally have a friend that might die because they can't navigate the insurance system. Like they have coverage, but the insurance and medical establishment is so fucked that they might just like, yeah, fuck it, I'll just die in a year. Yeah. And it's like, it's insane. And what people have to struggle through to get pain relief is unbelievable. Our lack of development of chronic pain interventions that transcend ablation and like opioids is fucking crazy. That's why I'm so excited to be working with Court. Like I don't know if we told you this, Tommy, like we started this Psychedelics and Pain nonprofit, the Psychedelics and Pain Association. So we're getting all really sorts of physicians, neuroscientists together, policy people to say like, let's do this. And what the bold claim I keep making, Court, and I love saying it out loud, is if we do this right, we could cut chronic opioid scripts by 80% worldwide once we start to understand the nervous system and do well with it and, have more appropriate interventions because people are fucking dying left and right because of, Richard Nixon's a-hole moves, Nancy Reagan's a-hole moves. Yeah. Not like Ronald was okay either, but, it's like, this is a long thing. Did you ever read Chasing the Scream?
No.
That one, that's next on the drug war reading list. I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah, we'll have another session after I read it.
It's so good.
Yeah.
But it's like, it was almost like the Narcotics Control Bureau was a jobs program for the alcohol prohibition thing when that quit.
Yeah. Can I talk on that pain management thing? Because I don't want to forget this thought. I think it's rerouting pain, rerouting the signal, and that happens through the nervous system. So again, I didn't get better just by taking psychedelics. I got better with my intention by using psychedelics, whether it was microdose schedule or macrodose, pre-planned suffering. I call it like positive suffering. Like I'm going to go do the 5-MeO. I don't do the 5-MeO just for fun. I know that I'm going to go to a place that I have to surrender everything to what I'm like, it's me versus medicine. No, I mean, it's just that ability to surrender and get the blessing, but you have to go through that portal of surrender. The pain. Okay. So a lot of my friends are professional athletes, football players, and you name it. I've trained with them. I have a really great network of people. One of the gentlemen that I live here in Tennessee nearby, his name is Kyle Turley. He's one of the faces for cannabis in the NFL. He's a hell of a guy. He's crazy as hell, but I love him to death. And we talk about, all these big gentlemen who it's like the big dog syndrome. Big dogs don't last long, right? You take a lot of abuse per square inch if you're a bigger dude, and you don't see them doing well as they get paid to entertain the masses. And now, like in NFL, I think you don't get a retirement unless you play. I don't want to. I think it's 10 years or 8 years or something. You don't get to that level or something crazy. And so, there's a lot of athletes that have abused their bodies, big guys and gals that are in a lot of pain. And
Yeah.
so it's like you got hardware and then you got the software. And the hardware, even though I could sit here and talk for hours about all the pain I have about this. I had literally 6 days ago, I got an infection under a cap, and I've never experienced pain like this since maybe I blew my knee out or something like 10 years
Trigeminal
ago.
nerve. It's
It hurt
huge.
so bad. I was like, if there was ever a time, like I was like, I started thinking, I can't take a Tylenol. I can't take anything. I haven't taken Tylenol or anything in 10 years or 5 years. And my wife's like, now you're just being an idiot. And so I had to learn, like, oh, it's my own ego. Like I can take a Tylenol. But the thing is that I was in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to take an opioid, but I need one because I'm in so much pain. But that wasn't an option. And then I go to the damn dentist, which I felt like I was going to buy a freaking used car, because they're like, take your x-rays. They like, oh, we'll give you an antibiotic and some Motrin. And then you go into the sales department where they're like, oh yeah, it's $6,000 to do 2 caps. And I'm like, that's my solution. That's it. And I'm like, man, but the pain, I had to deal with the pain this is the first time I've had severe chronic pain, like over an 8 or 9 in a long time. And it was because the way I deal with pain is I take like my microdose or my THC. I do my breath work. I get out into nature and I start moving. When you start moving, you start to move the neurochemicals around through the synovial fluid. And if you want to talk about joint pain, then that's how you attack joint pain, is you move the damn joints around and you do it with intention. And so 4 days a week, I go to this basically community center here in this Civil War veteran town of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I'm watching these people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of them are veterans, and they're not doing well, but they're doing the best they can. They show up to the gym and they're doing Tai Chi, they're doing all this movement. And I sit in a room by myself with my microdose on, and I start freaking moving, and I don't stop and until I feel like good. And it might only last 4 or 5 hours a day. And I know I'm going to wake up like a zombie and I can barely walk. My wife, she sees me every day. She's a horse trainer, so it's kind of fitting. But it's about how you process the pain. That's it. That's all. That's the difference, is how you process it.
Another interesting thing that you bring up there, like with the getting the synovial fluid to move around in the joints. The other thing is that joints have some of the highest neural beds in the entire body. And so that's where most of that proprioception is being driven from, because like the joints are like, that's where most of the motion is happening. And that's driving these primary motor afferents, these like big fat alpha fibers that are driving that up to the central nervous system. And then as a result of that, we're getting all sorts of descending inhibition that's inhibiting all that nociceptive pain. And hopefully, and this is what we've been kind of talking about, is like with the introduction of psychedelics into these movement programs, right? We start to see, this cortical reorganization. We start to see this descending inhibition, and then knock wood, hopefully some of this, like, critical period reopening metaplasticity that like Dr. Gould Dolen likes to, discuss quite at length, that actually some of that starts to sink in if it's done frequently enough and it's done with enough intensity. It's just fascinating, though. You brought this up earlier, that how this stuff is responsive to intent, right?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
not like just popping ibuprofen.
No.
You have to go in, and like you said, like a 5-MeO experience is not like something people do. I mean, God forbid, casually.
Hmm.
Some might be doing it for
Yeah.
kicks. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever. But it's it's one of those things where it's like usually, and I think this kind of bears repeating too. It's like, what does it take for United States military, special operators, and then like the VA as a whole? What does it take for them to like do this, no pun intended, about face and start embracing psychedelics? It's like, I don't think people realize that is there are lots of people doing innovative lateral stuff within the military, just like any other human organization, all the time, but this is one that's fairly embedded with very specific codes, ethics,
Hmm.
approaches. So what does it take
Yeah.
for the US military to suddenly be like,
Sure.
hey, we're really seeing genuine relief in our long
Hmm.
term, veterans
Yeah.
and operators here, people that had been in, very
Hmm.
significantly compromised positions. And now here we
Yeah,
are.
yeah, I can answer that. That would be what we're doing at the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition under retired 3-star General Marty Steele, who was the youngest Marine officer ever commissioned at 20. He did an enlisted deployment at 17 to Vietnam, came out of retirement at 77 years old. He's never done a psychedelic. He's good friends with Brian Merzacchio, the author of Immortality Key, and he says, I I do, as a leader, it's my duty to exhaust all options to see if I can help the men and women that serve this country. And so when I met Jesse McLaughlin through Jesse Gould at Heroic Hearts, I got to just an incredible group of men that went down to Peru and did the ayahuasca. Jesse McLaughlin, who I met, ironically, synchronicity, back in Miami at a Wonderland convention 2-3 years ago, and we became friends. And he invited me to go to Michigan, my home state, where we solidified a $1.3 million in psilocybin research last year for Michigan. And that's how I got into the coalition. And since then, I've worked in Kentucky, where we had 42 million on the table for ibogaine research that fell through because the story. I'll just be frank with you. They removed Brian Hubbard, who was the chairman of the opioid abatement committee in Kentucky, that was in charge of 900 million for opioid settlement. They removed him after the new attorney general came in, who he hired a former DEA guy. And so there's that. And then Brian's going to go up to Ohio and work there, where we have 1.3 million to work with. And so we're trying to figure out what the best plan is to do that. But we've also worked in Illinois. We did 5 million for the state to put aside for training our clinicians on how to use this. We saw the breakthrough with the VA a couple months ago. I'm watching all these dominoes. Okay, this is my life. I get to do this. I watched the dominoes set up, and it started with Stanford's ibogaine TBI report came out from Nolan Williams, and Dr. Andrew Huberman's like, Tommy, can't wait till you see this. This is incredible results or research. And I'm like, this is my life. I know this. So like I'm in this. So yeah. So we see the Stanford research come out, which ignites Bobby Kennedy Jr. to start kind of getting on board, which I knew was going to happen. He is just waiting. And then we see the VA agree under, Dr. Sue Sisley and Dr. Lynette Averill from Baylor. They're basically leading the VA and teaching the VA like how we're going to attack this. So the ball is starting to move, but that ball will not move unless we provide the energy. And you asked, what's it going to take? It's going to take veterans standing up and telling their freaking story about how psychedelics healed them. And so they need to grab their phones and use social media with an intention of changing and helping others heal and find this healing. Because I'll tell you something. The last time I was in Kentucky, and we had Deborah Mosh and a bunch of other people speaking on the potential for ibogaine in Kentucky, and they weren't too happy when this thing got turned upside down. And when I saw the other communities, when their eyes open to the potential of people healing, you got people like the African American community, the Native American community, these other communities that go, what? You mean all these people have been suffering and died? All this fentanyl overdose? You got Jelly Roll, who's doing some incredible work now, and he's like, everybody's going, look at these people at Beyond. Look at Talia and Tom and everybody else. And then they're going, and then they get angry because they want, it's like the way you process all the suffering. It's like, this could have been changed. And it's like, yeah,
That's
you have
right.
a right to be angry, but take that anger, turn it into productive work that we can move this thing forward. That's how it changes. And the saddest truth, in my opinion, is it doesn't really change until the damn government allows us to do the research to 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 and the sad part is once you go down that rabbit hole, you're pushing it into their domain, and they will raise the price 1,000 to 2,000%. They will try to what I call clinicalize this medicine in this way. You should be doing this in a group setting with in nature. It's not as, you don't make as much money. And so they will do that. And then it's our job to steer this ball as straight as we can until they take it. That's my, and then the whole time you're doing that, there's a lot of people going, well, we want to decriminalize it. We want to do this. I'm thinking there's no money in that. But the good news is the more we do this work, the more intention people see that doctors are saying, yes, this has benefit. Then the intention, and I'm praying that the collective intention will start to see that you don't have to go spend $2,000 to get an MDMA pill and do this with intention. You don't have to do this stuff. You can heal yourself if you create a safe container with intention. And I think that's like the end state.
So it's interesting now to see this move forward socially. We're seeing, veterans going on record, and we're even seeing doctors showing real interest in doing this. That's one of the reasons why Psychedelics and Pain Association put together open free coursework with some of the top research scientists in the world around psychedelics and pain, just so that there's a high level overview available out there. So psychedelicsandpain.org. But kind of more importantly, it's like, because so many vets have shared what this has done for them in terms of recovering from PTSD, TBI, which was like often seen as like as little as a decade ago, something that could not be significantly resolved. It could only be managed, right? And now we're seeing that transformation. And I will just say, like, my thanks to you guys, because like I have previous training dealing with traumatic brain injury from my training, as well as like post concussion syndrome, which is a real huge issue in that community. But because I saw you guys getting so much resolve from this, and then like my experience going through the study trial at NYU, how I had a huge transformation myself, that's what led me to really speculate this would be effective for long COVID. And now like studies are moving forward there that I've helped to, coordinate, and they're going to get published. And it's like, but if it weren't for you guys really putting yourselves out there, it just, it would not have the resonance with all sorts of communities that we're seeing right now, so honestly, my thanks.
Well, I call it paying it forward. I mean, we called it passing the word in buds. The first thing you learn, pass the word, and it's like, man, and that's the beautiful thing you see in this community is like when someone gets reset and they have the light in their eyes and they're ready, like they become a force. They become another wave, and that wave ripples. And so the more it's a beautiful cyclic loop of gratitude. You feel good, you want to help others, and you just find this gratitude, and it's an energy. I mean, I don't know how to describe it.
Most of the people I've met that have either gone through a study trial or have gone into um, some type of retreat and had very significant healing, it's almost like a moral compulsion afterwards, where they feel obligated to share this, and that's that's deeply affirming, just to see that, like, across so many cultural, political divisions, things like that, it's like there's really this unified feeling like we've got to get this out there.
Given like how poor a lot of our treatments are today for a lot of these things that we're talking about that are somewhat intractable, given conventional treatments, we finally see something that works for ourselves.
60% isn't a bad number. That's a minimum. Where do you see 60% over the leading treatment for opioid recovery?
Rare.
Never ever seen 60%. Yeah. You say 6%, maybe 4%, but not 60. That's why they're not letting us do the research, because they're not ready to. They're not set up for things. They have to. It always moves like they hear, and then they have to set up all these things in place, and that's where the work really is on this level that I'm at. Is like, okay, how are we going to keep the predators at bay? Because they already know that it works, but they have to make it fit into the economic model, and it will always require this people with a flag of intention to go, no, like, let's keep this thing as center as we can.
So let me jump in, because this is fun. This is where I love to live here. So it's like a mix of like federalism meets kind of like anarcho-syndicalism. So like, okay, so these people are in power, and there's incentive for them to arrest us and like stop us from doing what we are up to in taking care of ourselves, right? So Johnny 50 any day of the week could just pick up a lot of this scene and put us away for greater than a year, right? Like one of my friends did greater than about 20 years. So nonviolent offense, like, it's fucking crazy. So all right, so
what's
are they
name? Let's get some. Hey, let's spread this story. That's how we get them out.
Leonard Picard. He did 20 years in maximum security prison for alleged LSD manufacture. And he's unbelievable. He's worth checking out if you're ever in Santa Fe. He's amazing. So
what was his name?
Leonard Picard. He wrote a book called The Rose of Paracelsus. He has some amazing stories. Check out some podcasts with him later. We had him on once. I think I had his first interview.
Yeah, I think I remember. Was he at Microland? Was he speaking at Microland a couple years ago?
He was actually at the first Microdose.
Yeah, he wears kind of like safari kind of gear. Like he's kind of outdoor man. Yeah, I remember him.
It was awesome. We've done some fun hikes. So like, all right, so it's dangerous to be in our space, but we're going to do it anyway because we're such strong believers. And are they preventing us from doing research? A little bit, right? So what's going on is there's state level funding for science. There's also the most gigantic pool in the world for science funding is from the feds. So I'm a board member at Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, and we're actively working to unlock millions and millions and millions of dollars from the feds appropriately to fund psychedelic science. And your point about like pharma clinicalization, well taken, and there's an angle to this, but we need to hold on. Like Hamilton Morris years ago said, what an amazing problem to have that billionaires are going to fund psychedelic science. And then
but that's not sustaining,
we can still get these things and do our things. We can do us. Yeah. We can always do us, assuming we have good communities set up and like get some one or two people in your community trained in some way. And then how do we kind of anarcho-syndicalism angle is like this pre-Franco Spanish ideal of anarchism that Chomsky would write about a lot. Franco squashed it really hard.
Do you know who I was?
But it was like really.
I was married to that son of a bitch's great grandniece, Franco's grandniece. Ooh, she stole my 4 kids. That's another. Put a pin in that one.
Right, Franco.
Yeah,
there's some.
It's funny you should bring that up. Synchronicities.
Right. I don't think I brought up anarcho-syndicalism on the show ever, but it's one of my favorite things that Chomsky's ever discussed, and it's like, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we do it in a way that we're not necessarily incarcerating people, but we're like, if you want to follow the rules, cool. If you want to leave, fucking leave. But like, we don't have a system where it's like voluntary, right? You're kind of like forced-ish in here. But we need to start taking control of our own health and that of our community. And psychedelic science can help us understand how we can do it better. And safer with each other, right? Like, how much money has been spent on 5-MeO research? Like, fucking probably less than 20 million.
Yeah.
And we need to spend like 300 million on 5-MeO research.
Yeah. I'll only say two things on that. One,
Please.
the model of getting this from philanthropic and venture capitalists, that's gotten us this far, but I don't feel it's a sustaining, nor is it their job to do something that the government has the money to do. And
Agreed.
And in the
Yeah.
other side of that was, um, um, Dr. Sue Sisley, who was incredible. Like she like took on the DOJ and I think it was the FDA, and she won. And she can manufacture. She's licensed to manufacture, I believe, psilocybin, cannabis, and LSD.
That is accurate. I
Yeah,
tried to line her up with a chemist recently to
she's
make that
she's
all
like
happen.
my Janis Joplin older sister. She is just we hit it off the minute we met, and I'm just like
She's so fun.
She started a post in Montana, post 426. If any veterans are listening, you can go to that post, and she will pay your state, your local and federal fee for the American Legion, and she's writing all the legislation through this post. And as she gets numbers, we're the American Legion is all in. Like, I couldn't believe it. We had a conference last year that Adam Marr went to, and they literally in their letter, the American Legion said, we support all psychedelic research and clinical trials for our veterans to include ibogaine, MDMA, 5-MeO DMT, LSD, psilocybin. They listed everything. And I'm just like, the American Legion, like the people with the little, and it's not just American Legion. The plan that we have is we're using the pre-existing networks of supporting veterans, which is the American Legion, the VFW, and the Disabled Veterans Association. Those three umbrella communities are dying out. They're the World War II, Vietnam era, the horseshoes and beer and that whole kind of stereotype. But now we're coming in, we're regenerating new life, and they're like, yes. So that's how we're moving from the veteran side. But it's through the states. Like you said, the states have sovereignty over where they spend their medical research. But the federal doesn't move without the states. So we have to have a multi-prong approach in each state and develop these infrastructures so that the federals actually move.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in the room with the DAV, one of the heads of the DAV recently in DC, and it was fucking wild to hear what they're up to and what they're interested in. I was so impressed. And I'm glad to know VFW as well. I
forgot to say. Yeah, I forgot to say that about Sue Sisley. So the point I was trying to make, and I forgot, was over 3 years ago, they had a massive, massive cannabis for pain management study with veterans. Like, I can't remember the total amount of money, but it was like a couple $100 million. And what happened to that research? It got stopped dead in its tracks after it was approved, because it has to still go through the DOJ and the FDA. And so that's what she made me aware of, was like, look, cannabis is getting left behind. Psychedelics is taking the limelight. And I think it's because of this two reasons. Cannabis is much more, people are much more open to, more people use cannabis. So that means an economical shift if they give more awareness to the cannabinoid system and the properties that can help with pain management, because more people use it. But the reality is, I think there's a psychological stigma of smoking and seeing somebody with a joint where someone's microdosing a little bit of mushrooms in a capsule. It's clean. It's not, we're healing veterans, it's psychedelics. But I think there's a social stigma and a psychological stigma that we need to overlap. And I think we need to bring in the psychedelics, help bring in our brother and sister of cannabis, so that we have tools to heal pain and mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. It's awesome. And it's going to be a really big tent approach. I'm always kind of a both and person. It's like, how do we just keep stacking it and keep pushing and moving the needle? And like, I thank you for your participation in this whole thing. I know it's not fucking easy. And, but it's like, what else do we really want to do? You know what I mean?
It's the biggest blessing I ever had in my life. Like, they used to say, SEALs were tip of the spear. And I was like, playing, dressing up like a long haired, bearded guy, Pong with cool weapons and doing the government's work. That's not tip of the spear. This is tip of the spear. we're changing humanity and we're healing humanity. And I think I'm beyond blessed to say this is my story. It doesn't feel like work to me. It's just passion.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I really appreciate that. Cord, any final kind of closeout questions?
No, it's a pleasure. It's a genuine pleasure, and thank you. And like I've watched your testimony before, different congressional and House bodies, and it's just like being there in front of legislators and making it clear, absolutely clear what this has done. It's like what that's going to convey forward, I think, is inestimable. So thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thanks for having me
Right
on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Tommy. And where can people find you online?
Just Instagram, Flow State Frogman, on LinkedIn, and trying to do all the other Twitter stuff like that, but mostly Instagram.
Right on.
Awesome.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much, and I hope we can do more.
All
Appreciate
right.
you.
Take care. God bless y'all.